Hi, I'm Nate Huyu. These two maps were created for cartography and geovisualization in the fall of 2024. Titled A Decade of Deer Harvest in Minnesota, a preliminary look. These two maps were created to focus on deer harvest numbers normalized by the amount of non-water square mileage for the deer permit areas of 2013 and 2023. This was done to represent the amount of huntable land in each deer permit area, also known as a DPA. This topic was chosen as it is a very challenging thing to understand deer and their populations, and even more challenging to understand harvest numbers. There are many factors that affect harvest numbers, and many that affect deer population. The primary factor in the equation, in representing the data that the Minnesota DNR so diligently analyzes and puts together on a yearly basis, and comparing a decade of change in this manner, some insight may be gained on what needs to be studied and how to study it to better understand these challenging topics. The maps produced allow insight into this by showing the data in a digestible manner. All right, on the right-hand side, we have the final product map with some explanation, text on the right-hand side within it. On the left-hand side, we have the two maps created, and they are both showing change of one deer per non-water square mileage in each DPA unit, and then there are 7 different categories. And on the left-hand side, we have got Minnesota Level 3 ecoregions. I was taking this map into careful consideration as I was working through this process, and I was trying to decide how exactly I wanted to represent the data. And so it was challenging to me to figure out the best course of operations, and I was thinking about digitizing into Adobe the Level 3 ecoregions and comparing that data from the DPA units for each of the Level 3 ecoregions, as the ecoregions affect where the DPA units are to some degree. And doing that, I would have 7 categories to better compare the two to each other. But I thought just comparing the DPA units as individual units compared in 2 maps would be a little more effective. But the level 3 ecoregions help us better understand the map. So keeping that in mind, I moved through the process. So while producing the 2 maps, the topic of study was clear. The means and manner in which to do it were not set at the beginning. After careful consideration and research, it was clear that there was extremely little research done on comparative work involving deer harvest numbers. So the challenge next was finding the data and GIS files needed to complete the work. I contacted GIS DNR specialists in Minnesota, and the files were sent over to me, which helped a lot. The data provided was extremely comprehensive, however, and it had to be broken down in Excel to get a better understanding and to plan what best to do with it, since there was so much data for so many categories. I then decided that the best course of action was to take a look into the total harvest numbers for the 2 years that were 10 years apart to represent the decade of deer harvest. So 2013, 2023 were chosen to represent the most recent decade of change within deer harvest of Minnesota. The map was then produced and classified in GIS. 7 classes were chosen to maintain clarity, and manual breaks that represent whole numbers were chosen, as this makes it easier to better represent the data, as you can't necessarily harvest like a portion of a deer, and in representing one deer increments for the categories helps better visualize the amount of harvest for each set DPA unit. So the data was then normalized by the non-water square mileage of each DPA, and a color scheme of green was used to represent the outdoor nature of deer harvest or deer hunting. So after the production of the maps, in GIS, they were then sent over to Adobe Illustrator and put into an infographic format aided with the description and the insights gained from the map. Right, starting this out, we've got our insights slide. So taking a look at the top, we've got from our 2023 harvest PDF report from the Minnesota DNR, a snip of the total registered harvest for 2012 to 2023. So we can take a look at the averages and see that from 2013 to 2023, it's about if I remember correctly, a 14,000 difference between the two roughly. And taking a look at that, that's not, a large change. That's fairly within range. 2012 was the peak of Minnesota's deer harvest ever. So 2013 following after that, 2023 is slightly down than average. But taking a look at that, we can better understand what average deer harvest is like in comparing these 2 maps. And this is just a chunk from that PDF, as there are a lot of categories within the PDF that have a lot of information. So the results of the map have great insight to the changes that the state of Minnesota has gone through in 10 years. The map is just not just a representation of how deer harvest has changed. From it, one can see the expansion of the wolf range in the northeastern portion of Minnesota and how that likely has made deer harvest in the area more challenging. We have a map of that right in the middle on the bottom. We can see the changes through a couple different years. Wolf offer a natural predation that is going to reduce deer harvest numbers, and that may have a likely effect on the deer harvest numbers. And we can see a change that as that wolf range has expanded south, that there has been less harvest in that area. So it is visible the locations of key features such as the Minnesota River on the two maps. If you go back to the previous slide and you take a look on the finished product or on the first slide, you've got that bottom line that is in the southwestern side of the state, and that's the Minnesota River. And we can tell that. You see that as a line here in the bottom cata and the bottom southwest side of Minnesota on the Wolf Range map. You've got that line, and we've got our water regions map that helps you visualize it. That line that's going horizontal from that point on the southwest side down to the southeastern side of Minnesota, that's the Minnesota River. And that area definitely supports a lot of deer with the water in the area. So it's interesting to see that that's on the map in both 2013 and 2023. So one could deduce the deer population or the population of people based off of these maps as well. So taking a look at our third map here, on the right-hand side on the bottom, we can see amount of large cities within Minnesota, and we can see a large amount of highways. Highways are going to cause issues with deer travel ways, and the cities are going to represent areas where not much hunting may take place within the city, and providing like a sanctuary, or the amount of people in this area are going to push out deer. So taking that into consideration with our map as well, when we look at our final product, we can see Minneapolis-St. Paul has an effect on the area. So with some base knowledge on Minnesota, it's possible to make many deductions about the comparison of these two maps. The most interesting thing that I found, however, was from the two maps that were created, there seems to be an unlikely concentration of deer harvest within the center of Minnesota compared to 10 years ago in 2013. So I thought that this could be due to popularity of hunting and the fact that a higher population of people from 10 years ago within the cities who may travel north to hunt as a hunting destination may have increased the amount of harvest within that area, even though the surrounding areas have created a decrease from 2013 to 2023 in deer harvest. We need to take into consideration that not only does population of deer affect the harvest numbers, but the population of hunters is going to affect it. If we don't have any hunters in an area, we aren't going to have any hunting or harvest data for that area, and that can create a bit of a bias that is hard to understand based off of the maps created. But from the maps, we can get a really good preliminary look on what we would need to study for further insights on the data. Here I've got a list of all of my sources that I used throughout the process of doing research and trying to compare the data in different ways. A lot of it's from the Minnesota DNR, different websites, and then GIS websites, because I needed to find shapefiles and do some research on how to convert stuff, and it was quite the process. So a fair amount of sources there. And then I've also got a huge thank you to Julie Hines and Chris Sharonbro from Minnesota DNR for sending the data needed for the project and assisting me with the questions I had.